Hello and welcome to the Fall Start Fantasy Podcast with your hosts Cameron and Josh. On this week's episode, we will be talking about Week 7 and Waiver Weapons. But first, I get to introduce our special guest. Not only does he look exactly like Travis Kelce, but he's as good of a bowler as Kelce is at running routes. The Billy Lebowski, how are you doing today?
Pretty good.
Billy, I know that KU just lost, but are you still? Was it still a good weekend for you?
Yeah, they were competitive, so yeah.
Josh, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. K State had an easy week. They didn't have to play anybody.
Well, then we're going to go ahead and move right on into our matchup review. In the first matchup here, I got the win versus Sam in kind of a low scoring game, 104 to 91. The person I did want to point out here first, though, Josh, if you had noticed, Trevor Lawrence is a QB9 on the season right now. Jacksonville took the L in this game versus the Colts, but starting to see some good things from Trevor Lawrence. Are you hopeful for what he can become?
I don't think he'll be able to stay as a QB1 for the rest of the season, but to me, he's going to be a solid pick for this entire season. Um, Maybe not the best option, but if you're like, basically, he's your break if an emergency happens type of quarterback right now, assuming he's on your waiver wire, of course, our league, however you happen to have him, but he should have a good outlook. He's going to have some weeks where he's up there with the top, some weeks he's going to be a little bit off just on the matchup. But I think we can expect some pretty good things moving forward from him.
Yeah, the other guy here I wanted to point out, Billy. Kareem Hunt used to be a Chief, now is a disappointment on the Browns. 1.2 points in this game versus New England. What happened to Kareem Hunt? Why so bad from him?
He's probably just not as effective as he used to be.
Do you think perhaps he got game scripted out by the Patriots here?
Probably.
Yeah, the Browns running backs aren't really catching a lot of dump off passes, despite the fact that you would think you'd try and, get some swing passes out, maybe some wheel routes that would give the chance for these running backs to, get some yards after the catch and get them into the open space. But the Patriots just were not letting anything happen there. 1.2 from Kareem Hunt's pretty bad in a game that was definitely throwing a lot. Josh, the one other play I did want to talk about here, Russell Gage had 4 points this week in a game that they were still throwing against the Steelers. Now, no touchdowns from Russell Gage, but with Chris Godwin coming back, Julio Jones potentially being healthy, eventually this season, does Russell Gage have a role in this offense anymore?
Barring an injury to someone else, I would say no. Um, he might get a target here or there, but he's going to be like the fourth receiver in the depth chart or third, somewhere in that range. Typically, Brady's just going to throw it to Evans or Godwin or throw it to Fournette, either one of those three, before he even thinks about throwing it to Russell Gage. So moving forward, start him only if you absolutely have no other option. But generally speaking, I wouldn't play him.
Well, and the other guy Sam started, of these two, Russell Gage and Isaiah McKenzie, who would you rather have rest of season?
McKenzie. McKenzie was getting targets. He just didn't really bring any of them in during the game, but he was being used. He just had a very bad game.
Yeah, that elite Chief secondary locking him down. We'll go ahead and move on to our next topic before we bring up how bad they are. Malachi versus Josh. This was a close one, 119 to 104. It was really a matchup worth following as Josh, you remain undefeated in second place there. Had a good week there from everybody except for your boy, Tyler Lockett. Josh, tell me what happened there.
Sometimes, as a receiver, it just doesn't go your way. I know he had a decent amount of targets, not all of them connected. Cardinals secondary is better than you would expect. I won't say they're great, but they're better than expected. And honestly, with the way that Kenneth Walker was playing, they didn't really need to throw as much. So just one of those weeks, brush it off, and hope for the better week next week.
Yeah, Billy, I'm going to throw this next one to you. Taysom Hill plays quarterback and tight end and fullback and is mostly started in the special teams. The Saints might be without Andy Dalton this week. It's already expected that Jameis Winston is out. How big of a start is Taysom Hill to you when you get to put him in the tight end spot, considering he might be playing quarterback?
He'd be a start, definitely.
Well, then let me say this. Would you rather start Taysom Hill at tight end or Travis Kelce if you knew that Taysom Hill was going to
Kelsey.
be playing quarterback?
Kelsey.
Interesting. I think personally I would also start Kelsey. I just think he's too much of a guarantee in a great production. But if I'm looking for that upside, Taysom Hill has it. There's no game going to be this season where Kelsey gets 4 touchdowns again. That's just not going to happen. It would just show terrible things for the Chiefs offense if we had to keep doing that. So I think we're going to need to see it's the ball spread out a little bit more. And so I think I would start Taysom Hill. You know, I'm going to take it back. I would start Taysom Hill if I knew he was going to be the quarterback over Travis Kelce. We can track that one for next week, see how that goes. Last player that I wanted to talk about in this matchup, Geno Smith, the MVP, falling from the cliff, 12.68 points there for Malachi. Josh, talk to me about Geno and the Seahawks.
Like I mentioned earlier for Lockett, Cardinals secondary is better than you would expect. I won't say they're top tier, but they're better than you would expect. Sometimes players also just have off weeks, and like I mentioned earlier, Kenneth Walker was a beast in the game. He didn't really have to throw the try to even stay in the game because Cardinals definitely couldn't do anything on offense, so they just had to let the defense do all the work on that one and just stay ahead.
I think you're exactly right. In games that Kenneth Walker can have a huge advantage for the team, I really think that the wide receivers and the quarterback play from the Seahawks isn't going to matter as much. And so you're going to want to try and target the good games, the good matchups, the uh, really strong front seven versus a very weak secondary for guys like Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, who are still putting up decent numbers with Geno Smith. But I think Geno Smith comes out of the you got to start him every week category after this. Would you agree with that, Billy?
Yeah.
All right, then we're going to go ahead and move on to our next matchup here. Ethan versus Brandon. Ethan, number one, taking it to Brandon with 111.6 points. So far, every matchup has had pretty low scoring considering our average is usually 120 or so. But, Billy, go ahead and talk to me about Lamar Jackson and this loss to the Giants.
The Giants are like a really good team. They kind of limit Lamar Jackson a little bit.
Yeah, you weren't able to see really him dominating with either his legs or his arm. And if both of those are shut down, well, I'm not really sure if you're seeing an advantage there from him versus a guy like Kirk Cousins who got point 0.4 more points this week. So definitely going to be interesting to track to see, has Lamar been figured out this season? Is this just a struggle without Rashad Bateman? But Josh, to throw this one to you, Aaron Jones, 7.4 points. We're not really seeing the production from him this season that we are hoping for. The dump offs just aren't coming, and in this huge loss versus the Jets, he wasn't that great. So I'm gonna throw this to you: Kenneth Walker or Aaron Jones rest of season?
Hey, Kenneth Walker.
That is spicy, Billy. How do you feel?
Kenneth Walker too.
Two Kenneth Walkers. That's definitely. I really have a hard time disagreeing with that. The Seahawks, just the offense looked good when the run game was going, and I think Pete Carroll wants to run with that. Whereas Green Bay Packers have so much to figure out, and maybe it comes from 10,000 jump offs a game to Aaron Jones, but we're not seeing that right now. And they're passing, but it's not working. So I really think the Packers are in trouble as a whole team. Their defense is looking rough. The offense is completely not clicking. So we're going to need to see some huge improvements there. The last guy I want to talk about here, Billy, talk to me about Nick Chubb. Only 8 points this week. Are you worried at all about him?
A little bit, but not too much.
Explain more on that.
I think he'll get his production up. I think it's why I've been just a slow week.
All right. Well, then, moving on to our next matchup. Billy, you got the win this week versus Kyler. Getting a nice game here, moving on to 8th place. Now, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is only 3.3 points. Are you worried about the Chiefs running back situation, considering this was a throwing game and he wasn't getting that many passes from in the Bills game?
I am worried a little bit about it because he was getting his targets like he usually does, and that's how he usually gets good of his points. So it's kind of worries me a little bit.
But on the bright side of this game, 26.4, Michael Pittman was fantastic in that Colts game. The offense finally clicking. Do you have high hopes for Pittman going forward?
Yes, I do.
On the other side of this matchup, we did talk about the Seahawks offense, so I'm not going to talk about Noah Fant here. But the guy right under him, A.J. Dillon, 9.2 points. We just saw in the last matchup that Aaron Jones had 7.4. Are there hopes for A.J. Dillon, Josh, outproducing Aaron Jones the rest of the season, or is this just a split backfield like we talked about last week?
I think, kind of like we talked about last week, it's more or less a 50-50 timeshare. Some weeks Dillon will have the better weeks. Sometimes it's going to be Aaron Jones. It really just depends on the week. Obviously, if one of them manages to get into the end zone somehow, they have immensely a better week than the other one. But this is kind of what I'd start to be expecting. It'd be great if they can reach the double-digit mark. However, I highly doubt that will be the case moving forward if they continue to play at this rate.
Yeah, was definitely an interesting game for the Packers. Losing that went to the Jets, but I think the Jets are showing they're a good team. Defense looked good, and yeah, A.J. Dillon outperformed him, but it is exactly that. It's just going to be who's going to get more touches this week. That guy will probably end up with 2 more points than the other guy, and that's just not good from either of them. Hope more production comes from him. The last guy I want to talk about, and it's someone that everyone is super worried about. DJ Moore put up 3.7 points. I think he is a must bench right now. PJ Walker is terrible out there. I know the guy was an XFL quarterback, and maybe he needs to go back to that, but you're just not going to see anything from this Panthers offense with a new head coach and new offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator. Sorry, new defensive coordinator. The whole team has so much to figure out. Quarterback controversy is just an absolute mess. Even if a guy like Sam Darnold comes back, how is that good news for DJ Moore? Billy, is he someone that you would consider dropping at this point, despite the
Yes,
fantastic talent he has?
I would drop him right now.
Well, if Kyler gets to the point, maybe he's going to look at these waiver weapons and he's going to be like, well, I have some bye weeks. I'm going to need to figure something out. Maybe he does drop him, and we'll see if anyone takes a stab at him. But moving on to our next matchup here, we had Bandon versus Jaden, and I gotta say, this is a gross one. Third place Bandon with only 89 points and a 7-point win versus last place Jaden. Josh, this whole matchup reeks of doo-doo. We even see a 0-point Damian Harris, who did not even play, was started from the winning side here. Josh, who jumps out to you in this matchup?
Tyreek Hill, he had a good week. Mara's playing okay. Juju, though, is probably the biggest one that stands out here. I think before this, his best scoring week was like 12 points or 11 points, somewhere in that range, barely double digits. So finally seeing him get into the end zone, actually looking like a decent wide receiver, not like what he was in his first 2 years, but still a good receiver. Definitely a nice change for Chiefs who desperately need that standout receiver, someone else that can kind of relieve some pressure off of Kelsey, who gets doubled nearly every play.
Yeah, it's not good for Jaden when half of your points came from Kamara and Juju together, and it's not good for Bandon when a third of your points came from Tyreek Hill alone. Billy, talk to me about Tyreek Hill. He had a very interesting quarterback play, as we'll talk about later, with Skylar Thompson and then Teddy Bridgewater coming in. Is I know that some people were worried about Tyreek Hill, 29.7 points. So, are their fears completely diminished?
Um, I think it is.
You think he's just an absolute start every week, no matter who the quarterback is?
Yeah, because he's a safe option for who is quarterback for Miami.
Yeah, I think the head coach there, Mike McDaniel's, doing an excellent job forming the offense around the players that he has. Lots of speed, and really, he's just getting them into the open space, and they're producing. It's a good thing all around from that team. The last guy I wanted to talk about here was Tyler Higbee, 1.7 points. Very disappointing there against the Carolina Panthers. And yes, they got the win. It was a super ugly game just because of how bad the Panthers were. Yet the Rams, 24 points. None of the offense looked like you would want it to. And I am so terrified of the Rams offense moving forward. If they do not start figuring out a run game, they're going to be in serious trouble. And at the same time, their receiving game is looking terrible too. Hopefully that team figures it out, or hopefully not. I would prefer the Seahawks in the division. But we're going to go ahead and finish up the matchups of the week with Preston versus Chris. Chris getting another win. I think he's on one of the biggest win streaks right now, off of the back of 32.5-point Joey Burrow. And Josh, talk to me about that Cincinnati versus Saints game. I thought the Saints had a good defense. Was I wrong?
Normally I would agree with you. However, it might have been one of those where the Bengals offense that we saw last year, somehow something clicked with them, and all of a sudden they're like, wait, this is how we play football again. This is how we score points. Um, yeah, maybe the Bengals offense is back, or maybe it's Saints are just not as good as we thought they were. Be either one of those, or it could be a combination between.
Yeah, Billy, you would agree that Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase are must starts every week, correct?
Yes.
And you would agree that Joe Mixon and T. Higgins are also must starts every week as long as they're healthy.
Yes.
Well, then, how excited would you be if you got to start a team of Joe Burrow, Joe Mixon, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins all on the same team?
I'd be pretty excited.
And I think that exactly shows the argument that we're seeing when we talk about, oh, you shouldn't stack players in a redraft league because you're capping your upside. And I just want to say that is so completely not true. You can absolutely have two, now even three players, all from the same offense, as long as that offense is an offense you trust. You are not going to go to the Broncos offense and you're going to be like, oh, gotta get me some Melvin Gordon, Cortland Sutton, and Russell Wilson. No, that is not an offense that you trust from that team. But you can go to these teams like the Josh, give me another elite offense.
And right now, I have Dawson Knox and Stephon Diggs from the Bills. You can have
Exactly.
two or three
Exactly.
players from the Bills.
And even on that same team, you could start Knox, you can start Allen, and you can start Diggs. And then you can also go to the guys who are the secondary options like Devin Singletary and Gabe Davis and be like, yeah, I'm happy to start these guys too, because when you have a great offense, you know that they're going to be putting up points every week, and you can trust them to do that and not take away from each other at the same time. So when you talk about stacking players, you need to make sure that you're picking good offenses that have a lot of good players on them, and that is when it is okay to stack in a redraft league. Now, I just talked a lot right there. The last person I wanted to question here was an interesting start of the week there. from last week, a waiver weapon, was Jacoby Brissett, 8.64 points. We've talked about the Browns, and I think in almost every single matchup. But I just wanted to point out again, I don't think he actually looked as bad as the stats are going to show. I watched the game, and while he looked completely inconsistent and he had the 2 bad picks, it was a game that they knew that the Patriots forced them to pass, and yet Brissett was still able to go out there and pass the ball without the run game opening up the offense for him. And I think you can actually feel good about Brissett moving forward. You just want to make sure you're doing it against defenses that aren't as good as the Patriots. Billy, the last thing I want to throw here, Melvin Gordon, 0.8 points. What happened with the Broncos?
Just not very good offense right now.
And that stems from the quarterback, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, you go from the quarterback down to the receivers, down to the running backs. Every single part of that offense is completely not working. But are you happy with how the Denver defense is looking?
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit more about that Broncos defense.
They're just holding up the team right now since the offense is not quite clicking. So they're the ones trying to keep the team together while the offense tries to figure it out with Russell Wilson.
I think you're exactly right. They play the Jets on Sunday. Jets are on the up and up. Broncos are on the down. Would you start the Broncos defense against that Jets offense? Billy?
Would. I
Would you
would.
start? You would? How about you,
Yeah, I
Josh?
would.
Would you be looking to start the Broncos defense versus the Jets offense, despite how good they've been looking recently?
You already have Denver's defense. You kind of have to keep them. So I would say yes. However, otherwise I would say no. Just because Denver is one of those defenses, you kind of have to play them. In an ideal situation, I would actually probably sit them this week if there's a favorable option. Just because I think the Jets' offense is really starting to click. If Zach Wilson can improve, it might be a top 10 offense.
That's spicy. That's spicy. Garrett Wilson, 1.8 points, and I think Elijah Moore had 0, but you know what? Corey Davis had a good game, and Brees Hall had a great game, so we'll see what we can see from the Jets offense versus the Broncos defense. As boring as their games have been, you got to give a lot of credit to the defense on the Broncos. Well, that about concludes it for the weekly matchups. We're going to go ahead and move on to our next section.
Weapon. Hold on. Here we go.
Last week's waiver weapons of Jerick McKinnon, Skylar Thompson, and Jacoby Brissett were all misses. I do want to give a shout out to Josh's selection there. Skylar Thompson, hard to put it as a miss, but finished as a QB 28 with only 4.5 points. Not what you wanted to see there, considering the fact that he went out with an injury when he had all the opportunity in the world to go out and be dominant. Heartbreaking there, as we're fans of him on this podcast, but Jerick McKinnon and Jacoby Brissett were also misses, so that moves us down in the miss column, or up in the miss column, down in the hits column. 4-2 for both Josh and I. Billy, I'm hoping that you'll be the turnaround for the guests, because right now they're 1-5, and they're going to need to see some waiver weapon success here. So we're going to go ahead and move on into the first selection this week, and that is Josh's selection, Hunter Renfrow.
So, yes, Hunter Renfrow. Arguably one of the best receivers, or at least route runners you're going to find in the NFL. Basically, you watch any film of him, and you're just going to be amazed on how he does these routes. And correct me if I'm wrong on this one, Darren Waller looks like he's going to be missing some more time, correct?
It's right now, Darren Waller is still questionable. He could play. It's just not certain.
Okay, so even if Darren Waller plays, he's going to be a little bit hobbled. Hunter Renfrow usually takes up the kind of targets that he would normally get. So especially if you're in a PPR league or even half-point PPR, I think Hunter Renfrow is going to be a smash play because Houston's defense, while it is decent, they're going to be focused more so on Devontae Adams than someone like Hunter Renfrow.
Yeah, the Texans defense has really been a big lacking point in that team setup right now. Raiders will probably be taking it to them in both the ground and the air, but let's talk about the other side of the ball here with Billy's selection. Billy, talk to us about Nico Collins.
Nico Collins has led the Texans in receiving the last 2 weeks before their bye. He outpaced Brandon Cooks 2 weeks in a row, and then uh, every week except week one, he had 4 targets or more. So he's getting targeted. So he's like he's probably more of an option in Texas offense right now. So
Yeah, I was just looking at that myself. Brandon Cooks with not just a down week, but sort of a down trend. Not really producing the insane floor that you would expect from Brandon Cooks. And I think Nico Collins is really getting himself a role in this offense. And in a good matchup versus the Raiders, whose defense has been fantastic on that pass rush. Chandler Jones and Max Crosby just doing exactly what they hoped for that defensive line, but the secondary has not been fighting in the same way. I think that definitely it's a good defense to target. Josh, do you have anything else to add about Nico Collins in this matchup?
It'll be a solid floor play. I don't think he'll have nearly as high as an upside, but good for a floor play. He should be pretty decent.
Yeah, and exactly on the same team, Davis Mills is the quarterback I have selected as my waiver weapon of the week. So far, Davis Mills has been somewhat on a downtrend with only the QB 28 on the season. Is that correct? That cannot be correct. I need to check that one out because my boy General Mills is way better than that. No, he is the QB 28 on the season, averaging only 10.4 points. But that is against. I'm going to read the defenses that Davis Mills has been playing against. First is the Colts. Then it was the Broncos in week 2, the Bears in week 3, the Chargers in week 4. Last week he had the bye. I think that those are some tough competition from Davis Mills. And when he's going to be attacking that defense, he needs to be able to do it in all points of the game. And this week he goes up against the Raiders, who are 32nd, dead last against opposing quarterbacks. I think that with the bye weeks that people are seeing, if you got Josh Allen, if you got Jalen Hurts, you're needing a guy who's going to come up and he's going to give you a very good floor and maybe even a high ceiling. We saw what he did last year towards the end of the year and how he was putting up 33 points in a week. I think you have a great chance at greatness here with Davis Mills. Brevin Jordan's coming back, and Damian Pierce is definitely opening things up in the ground game. I'm liking what I see from Davis Mills. I think he's an absolute great start for people this week, and I may even consider him over my guy Trevor Lawrence that I have right now. Billy, do you have anything else to add on this Texas offense?
nope.
Josh, did you want to comment on Davis Mills' hand size? I know that it's significantly larger than tiny man Skylar Thompson's.
Definitely not the hand size they would expected from someone whose nickname is General Mills. You expect at least a respectable 10 inches if you're going to be called a general, but you take
Well,
what you can get, I guess.
Well, while Josh is looking for 10 inches, we're going to go ahead and move on to our mailbag question of the week, which is from C. Smith 1994, who's asking, do you stash kickers and defenses? And I'm going to go ahead and throw this one to you first, Billy. You are known to be someone who likes to really think ahead, start picking out. You just talked about, before the podcast started, talked about picking up your tight end for next week. Well, Travis Kelce's on bye week. Are you thinking that far ahead for kickers and defenses too?
Not that quite far ahead yet, but I'll probably start thinking about it soon when the bye is coming.
Josh, how are you feeling about the stashing kickers and defense discussion?
It really just depends who you have for your defensive kicker. If you have a Harrison Butker or Justin Tucker, absolutely stash them for their bye week. As soon as their bye week is done, just leave the one kicker. Of course, barring injury. But Same thing goes for our defense. Right now, I currently have the Cowboys defense. They are playing, for the most part, ignore the Eagles game, phenomenally. Um, so when you have a defense can be a week winner for you, they have won me weeks in the past. It's a good idea to stash them. It might hurt a little bit, but stash them, at least for their bye week.
Now, you did just talk about how the Cowboys had a down week against the Eagles, and you're absolutely right. They weren't able to do what the Cowboys defense has been doing and dominating with Micah Parsons on the pass rush and keeping people out of the end zone with Trevon Diggs, who's looked actually really legit this season. But let's say, for this example, while we're talking about the Dallas Cowboys, this week they've got Detroit. Next week is the Bears, so great options there. But then immediately after that is the bye week. Then they're up against the Packers, the Vikings, and the Giants, who have been really on the up and up. Would you think for any reason that you would drop them during the bye week because you're scared of how who they're up against after the bye week?
To me, no. If they're solid defense, you kind of have to keep them for the rest of the year. They've already played some decent opponents. I won't say the offensive juggernauts like the Eagles, but still, generally speaking, good offenses. And they've held their own, if not done extremely well. So to me, even in those cases where they're up against some of the better offenses, some of the better weapons like Justin Jefferson, you still hold on to them and hope for a good week and hope for Micah Parsons to get 20 sacks in the game.
20 sacks in a game would be pretty hard for anybody but Micah Parsons. I think that'd be pretty much run of the mill for him. The last team that I want to talk about when talking about streaming defenses and do you stash a defense, to me is the Baltimore Ravens. Right now, if you asked anybody, oh, hey, is the Baltimore Ravens defense looking good? Most people would say no. They're giving up a lot of points. The games are going kind of crazy. The in week one, they led up 380 passing yards against the Dolphins, 547, Patriots, 447. These are not good passing offenses, and they are just dominating them because of how injured and how dysfunctional the secondary is looking. And you're really starting to see, like, hey, wow, this Ravens defense isn't able to stop the run as well as we had thought, and they're with the injuries that they're having, it's seriously a problem. But the Ravens are the defense 9 right now on the season, and yes, that makes them a number one defense right now. That's a defense 1 if you want to call it that. Billy, would despite all those injuries, but when you're hearing these good stats, the Ravens have a bye week coming up in week 10, would you be thinking, okay, I'll just drop them? Or are you like, hey, they've been the defense number 9 despite the injuries so far. Should I hold them?
I would just stay with them and let them get healthy, let them get their guys back. I'm sure that they'll play better, they'll get their players back, and they'll be hopefully more effective defensively.
I absolutely agree. And the last team that I want to talk about here is the Green Bay Packers. I'm going to give you guys a number, and you tell me if you think the Packers are above or below that number in defensive rankings. That number is the defense 18. Do you think they are above or below defense number 18 on the season? Josh, throw to you first.
Give me below.
Give you below. Billy, how about you?
Below.
Both taking below. Okay, how about the defense 19? Above or below that?
I think they are 19. I'm going to stick with that's where they're at.
You think that's where they're... Okay, I'll say 19 and a half then. Would you take the over then?
I'll take above.
Okay. Billy, how about you? 19 defense number 19 and a half. So they're either 19 or they're 20 for the other side. Are you above or below that?
I think they're 20.
You think they're 20? Well, you would both be incorrect because they're the defense 21, tying with the Bengals and the Colts. This team put 2 first-round picks into the defense, made some big signings, gave a ton of money to Jair Alexander, and they are the defense number 21 on the season and have looked absolutely abysmal. 2 points against the Jets, 3 points against the Giants, 1 point against the Vikings. Their one good week where they had above 10 points was against the Buccaneers with 11. I think that the Packers are a safe team to drop. If they were playing anyone else other than the Washington Commanders this week, I'd say you can go ahead and drop them. But right after is the Bills. And I think that's not a defense that I'm going to be looking at in the future. The last thing I wanted to point out here, this is the kicker rankings of the last few seasons. Starting from the top, we have 2021, then 2020, and 2019. A guy you're seeing up here consistently is Justin Tucker with 5th, 8th, and 3rd finishes. I think that there is absolutely zero reason that you should ever consider stashing a kicker, even with a guy like Justin Tucker, even with a guy like Daniel Carlson, who is currently the kicker number 1 on the season right now. I believe he's averaging 11 points per game. I don't care. I see the production that I'm getting from the kicker 12 is 7.6 or 8.1, 8.5, whatever it is. And I'm seeing that the guys above him are averaging maybe 1 or 2 more points per game. I am purely going to be looking at what is a defense that dominates the red zone and how can I pick a team with a decent enough offense for their kicker. And that's what I'm going to be targeting week to week. If I had Daniel Carlson, I would maybe even have him in a couple leagues. And actually, I would say after this bye week, I definitely don't. I'm not going to be bidding any fab on him. I'm not going to be worried at all about picking up a about keeping him and picking up a sub for him on the week, unless it's just because I want to drop Elijah Moore for being such an embarrassment on my team. Do these numbers surprise either of you guys?
Not too much. They make sense.
Well, then that does it for our mailbag question. The last thing that we have here is a rank 'em segment, and this one started to get a little heated before we even pressed the record button. Billy, Snickers, Milky Way, and Reese's, go.
Reese's, Milky Way, Snickers.
Snickers at the bottom? What? Josh, tell me he's wrong.
I mean, he did get Reese's and Milky Way mixed up. It's Milky Way, Reese's, and then Snickers for me. Although, I will add, if I'm on a road trip, I'm going for Snickers instead of a Reese's. Generally speaking, Reese's above a Snickers.
You Western Kansas guys don't even get it right. It goes Reese's, Snickers, Milky Way. Milky Way is just a Twix bar without the best part, and that's that crunch in it. Milky Way is just a bottom tier candy right there. Snickers is fantastic, and Reese's is a definite number 1 there. I'm agreeing with Billy.
Fighting words saying Milky Way's trash tier, basically.
It is. Look at that right there. There's nothing good in a Milky Way. They don't even show it on their packaging because they know how gross it looks. They're like, "Ugh, we should just definitely not put that on there." Whereas Snickers and Reese's are like, "Yeah, look at this delicious bite out of it," and you're like, "Yeah, that's good looking candy."
Here's the thing with Milky Way: people know it's going to be good. They don't have to try to trick you like Snickers and Reese's by showing, "Ooh, here you go, pretty picture that we just happened to make look better." People know exactly what they're getting in Milky Way, and it's going to be great.
Okay, I see. So the prettier the picture, the worse the candy. Is that what you're saying?
In most cases, yes.
In most cases, yes.
In this case, these 2 cases, yes.
And Billy, are you agreeing with that idea?
Yeah.
All right, well, clearly we need to get out of this rank 'em segment as you guys are absolutely crazy. But we're going to go ahead and wrap it up there. That does it for this week's episode of the Fall Start Fantasy Podcast. Thank you all so much for listening. Thank you to our listeners and those who submitted a mailbag question. If you have a take about any of our Rankum segments, or if you think, hey, your waiver weapons sucked, this week, go ahead and drop us your waiver weapons of the week, and we'll take a look at those. Now, you guys have anything else to add on this episode?
Go Chiefs.
Go Chiefs.
Go Chiefs. All right. Then we will be back next week before week 8 begins, so be on the lookout for our next episode so you can be ready before the ball is snapped. Thank you, and goodbye.